What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is my top 10 favorite horror films of all time. So here's the thing. This is going to be a longer video than usual, so brace yourselves. This is a list that I've been wanting to do for several years now, but I was very apprehensive because a lot of times when I talk to someone about horror films, specifically a new horror film, they'll ask, was it scary or was it not? And in the back of my mind, I always say, horror is such a broader genre than just, is it scary or is it not? Because there are plenty of times where a film might not necessarily be scary, but does that mean it was a bad film? No, not at all. Filmmaking is important. Creating an atmosphere, tone, pacing, themes. Because again, horror genre in particular does a great job with having commentary that is very interesting and perspective of the time period. So it's like those things you want to take in consideration. And there's another thing, is that a film such as horror, the genre itself is broken into three categories. 1, dread, to anticipate with great apprehension. 2, terror, a state of intense, overwhelming fear. And 3, the one that most people think about, is horror, intense feeling of shock or disgust. So there might be a horror film that you watch that might not necessarily be shocking or disgusting, but at the same time, you might actually be able to feel that dread, or you might be able to feel that terror. Now, if it doesn't check mark any of those, or only checks mark 1 or 2, that's fine. But even if it doesn't have any of those check marks, is it a good film? That's something to keep in the back of your mind. I think it's important because there are plenty of films that I've seen where it's like, oh, I wasn't scared and I didn't have those three feelings necessarily, but I still think it was a great, great film. And there's going to be a couple of times where I will mention that. There's one in particular on this list, like in terms of honorable mentions, where it didn't garner any of those necessarily three feelings, but I still think it's a great film, and it is a horror film, so that's why I have it on the list. Other thing I want to give you guys perspective on is the genre of horror is something that many people will have it where, you know, they're watching films of their time period. Like, for example, as a teenager growing up, it was like the early 2010s. So most teenagers of my age were watching horror films of the 2010s. For me, I didn't grow up watching horror films. I didn't really watch horror films in theaters until like, I want to say 2015. I think It Follows might have been my first horror film that I saw in theaters. So when I was introduced to the genre, I saw a couple here or there in like 2012, 2013, from like 20, 30 years ago. But when I actually wanted to go down the rabbit hole of horror, I started what I thought was at the time the beginning, which was Psycho, 1960. So I watched Psycho and then other horror films from the 60s, then I went to the 70s and 80s. So I was witnessing all of these groundbreaking films the same way that I imagined audiences were experiencing at the time, where they hadn't really seen anything like that. Many times people today will watch these films that obviously were greatly inspired by classics from 50, 60 years ago. So when they finally watch those classics, those films don't necessarily have as much of an impact on them. And they're like, well, it was kind of predictable. And it's like, well, dude, like it's predictable because you're watching it all backwards. So that's something to keep in mind, is that because I grew up in a household where I wasn't allowed to watch horror films, I was witnessing these films 2014 onwards the same way that other people of the time period were, in that I was going backwards and then finally was watching films of my time period. So again, I say all this to give you guys some background information as me as a horror viewer. Other thing I'll mention is that there are going to be some horror films that didn't really make the cut, and it is a shame. Something like Alien or Halloween. Love those films, I really do, but when I think of horror films, I don't necessarily think of them in particular, although Halloween was something that I did experience in 2015, and I can definitely see where it really heavily was, an influence on many, many horror films to come. But I will give you guys 10 honorable mentions, and then from those 10 honorable mentions, I'll then go from 10 to 1, being obviously my favorite horror film. So there are also going to be films on here, I will say, that are multi-genre facets, to where it's like they can be categorized many different ways, but they are also happen to be horror. So again, I apologize in advance for giving you guys all the exposition, but I did think that it was important so that way you guys understood where I was coming from. Now, all that exposition aside, let's get started with the honorable mentions. So the first honorable mention, we have Audition. I know I have the back cover. The reason why I'm showing you guys the back cover, not the front cover, is because the front cover is a spoiler in itself. Watch Audition. Audition is a great film. It's a film that while watching it, it's a slow burn effect, but then the final 20 minutes comes around and holy cow, it is really something. please watch Audition. It is a great, great film. It doesn't get talked about enough, but I would highly recommend you check it out. And next up, we have Under the Skin. So Under the Skin is an art house sci-fi horror film. This is what I was mentioning earlier, how this film doesn't necessarily elicit dread, terror, or horror, but it is a film that I think is so, so well crafted. Scarlett Johansson does such a great performance. The visual storytelling is just incredible. The score is just so haunting. It's beautiful, but at the same time, incredible ending. It's also a film that every time I watch it, I get a different kind of feeling, which is something that I also think is quite powerful. I am excited. I'm filming this video, I think, what is it, October 6th? I am going to be seeing this film on October 18th in theaters, which is something I'm very much so looking forward to because I unfortunately didn't get to watch this in theaters when it came out, and I think it was early 2014, so I'm finally getting a chance to watch it, so I'm excited. Under the Skin, great, great film. Highly recommend it. Next up, we have The Innocents. I love The Innocents. I think it has such a great tone, great pacing. I love the atmosphere. The atmosphere is just great. Black and white cinematography. I bought this on a blind buy Criterion Hall, and I'm so glad that I did because at first I was kind of apprehensive because the next film I'm actually going to mention, I saw first. So I was like, okay, so if I watch that film first, I'm not going to be able to appreciate this film as much. But I'm happy to report back that no, I was able to because the two films are different enough to where I'm able to say that, yeah, I'm glad that I own both. But yeah, The Innocents, great, great film. It's ambiguous when it needs to be, and it is such a great atmospheric film. Watch it. And next up, we have The Others, which is also slightly based on the book The Turn of the Screw, which The Innocents is as well. This film and The Innocents are very similar in terms of premise, but in execution, they are different enough to where I'm able to say, yeah, watch both. They're great films. The Others is one of the first horror films that I saw. I'll never forget, my aunt, shout out to my Aunt Kathy, she actually let me borrow the DVD for this film. And I watched it, and holy cow, I will never forget the twist ending. And it was like a gut punch, too, because I saw... Actually, I'm not going to mention the other film, but I saw a certain other film that came out a couple years before this film, and both films have pretty big twists. So knowing that, I was like, okay, so is it going to be the same twist? And it really isn't. It's kind of like a backwards of that twist. And holy cow, I will never forget the way my stomach turned in a good way. It was something that was a feeling that I will never forget. Just the overall last 5 minutes of this film is just something I will never forget about. And then I decided to rewatch it, and of course it hit even harder years later. This is a great, great film. It's very underappreciated these days. Watch it. Nicole Kidman did such a great job in this film. And I will say this, I own it on Blu-ray. I bought it a couple years ago on Blu-ray because I did not think it was going to get a 4K release, especially from Criterion. Rest assured, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be upgrading to the 4K from Criterion. We'll see, though. But watch The Others. It is really good. And next up, you're not going to see too many jump scare films on this list. Like Insidious, I like Insidious quite a bit, but it did not make the cut. But there is a film from the same director that did, and that is The Conjuring. The Conjuring is such a great film. Holy cow, what a film. I will say that I did watch this, I think it was October, November of 2013, which I know is before I started my binge of all the classics. But I think the reason why I was able to really appreciate this film, especially at the time, was that even when I went through my 2014-2015 binge of like horror films, classics from the past, none of those films were really kind of similar to The Conjuring, because The Conjuring, the film that you could closely resemble it, is something like along the lines of, say, The Amityville Horror, which I didn't see until a couple days ago. So it's interesting, though, because watching The Amityville Horror, it's great to see that The Conjuring was able to take that similar idea, but make it so much better. The Conjuring is a modern-day horror classic. It is a film that has jump scares that actually work quite well, atmosphere that's palpable, directing that's quite sharp, and really good performances. I quite like this film, and it's got a score that to this day is haunting for me. I really like The Conjuring, and yeah, that's why it's an honorable mention. And next up, this is a film that I put off watching for a while. It wasn't until, I would say, several months into the pandemic that I finally watched this, but we have Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978. The reason why I put off watching this for so long was because I watched the original, the 1950, I think it's 6 version, in 2015, and I liked it. I liked it quite a bit, so I was like, why would I watch the remake? Especially since I saw the, what was it? There was another Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake with Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig. It's The Invasion. I saw that actually first before I saw the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and I thought The Invasion was terrible. So I was like, this one's probably not going to be that good, so why watch it? But 5 years later, after watching the original, I decided to check this out. And I'm glad that I did, because as you see, I own it on 4K. I really dug it. I actually think it's better than the original. And it's got an ending that is just so good. Like, holy cow. This is great body horror mix, but also just really great at eliciting terror. I love this film, and I think it holds up quite well, and that's why it's an honorable mention. Speaking of body horror, we have a great body horror classic. We have Videodrome. David Cronenberg did such a great job with this film. I absolutely love this. The Fly easily could have made this list, but again, I just wanted to have 10 honorable mentions. Videodrome is great. I love Videodrome. I also think that the Criterion work is just incredible. I mean, the way that it looks like a VHS disc, I think is great. Long Live the Flesh, watch Videodrome, especially if you like body horror. The practical effects, the makeup work, outstanding. Howard Shore score, it's great. Long Live the Flesh. Another body horror film we have, in my opinion, my favorite John Carpenter film, we have The Thing. The Thing is great. Great body horror, great score by Ennio Morricone, great directing. Kurt Russell has a great lead performance. This is a film that stood the test of time. It's great. I will never forget watching this film for the first time in late 2014. Watching it late at night. I think I watched it in October of 2014, if I'm not mistaken. But that was just so great because I remember it was really cold out. And again, this film obviously takes place in the cold. So I was able to really feel as though I was there. What a great film. It gets better each time. And next up, this is, in my opinion, a modern day horror classic. We have The Witch. So yeah, I know this is the Blu-ray cover, but I do actually own it on 4K. It's because I originally bought it on Blu-ray, and then I upgraded to the 4K at my local record store. But they didn't have the slipcover, so I just decided to keep the slipcover for the Blu-ray and put it on the 4K. This is a great film. It's not for everyone. This is what I would deem as like art house horror, similar to like Under the Skin. So there are going to be people that watch this film and they might not necessarily like it, especially if they lean towards like jump scare horror. But if you are someone that likes slow burn, meticulous, atmospheric, tonally consistent films that really elicit an interesting perspective on this day and age of this time period, I would highly recommend you watch it. This is the film that, for me, when I watched it, I immediately was like, Anya Taylor-Joy is going to be a breakout star. And it turns out I was right. This is a great film. I love it. And it also showed the potential of Robert Eggers. Incredible filmmaker. The Lighthouse, by the way, almost made the list. It was close, but I was like, you know what? I think of it more as like a drama, thriller, art house film. But it was close. I love The Lighthouse. I love The Witch. And my last honorable mention, this was so close to making my top 10. So close. One of the most divisive films of the 2010s, Suspiria, 2018. I love this film. It's like 7 acts, or no, I think it's 5 acts, and it's like a prologue and an epilogue. It is a long film. It is a film that not necessarily will work for everyone, but I love it. It is a throwback to 70s filmmaking. It's got zoom-in shots. It's got actual practical effects, actual gore that isn't CGI, although towards the end there is some CGI blood. But for the most part, it's very much so grounded in, hey, we want to shoot things in camera. We want to be very ambitious. We want to have directing that is very meticulous. It is building tension slowly but surely. This film is not going to be for everyone, though. There is a heavy dosage of visual storytelling. There is a world that it's creating that you might not necessarily like, but it is a film that nonetheless is very ambitious, and I really admire it for that. And I think that it is a great film. Not for everyone, again, but I love it. It is a Rorschach test of a film. You will show this film to 10 people, and you'll get 10 different reactions. I love that about a film, and this film definitely is that. Oh, and I actually like it better than the original Suspiria, but I do like the original Suspiria. But yeah, that's my honorable mentions. So now we get into the nitty-gritty top 10, 10 to 1. So to kick things off, number 10, we have Night of the Living Dead, which I actually rewatched last night. It holds up. This is a film that honestly gets better and better with each viewing. I'll never forget the first time I saw it because it was early January 2015, I would say, and I had to watch it for my independent filmmaking class because this was a film that, when it came out, was an independent film that made it big, and it was something that really impacted the genre. I'm not going to lie. When I saw this in 2015, I actually wasn't that big of a fan. I thought it was solid. I appreciated some of the filmmaking, but overall, it just didn't really have much of an impact. And the same day, I actually watched Dawn of the Dead, the sequel, and I liked it a lot better. And I was like, wow, this is similar to like Terminator 1 and 2, where the sequel is better, and I actually go back to the sequel more times. But over the course of time, again, vision is 2020, I suppose. It's a film that I've actually not really gone back to the sequel as much. I think the last time I watched the sequel was like 5-6 years ago. But Night of the Living Dead, I bought on Criterion, and I've seen like 3 times in the last 4 or 5 years. It's a film I keep coming back to, and each time that I watch it, I gain more and more insight into this film, and I appreciate it more and more. It's also a film that takes place in Pennsylvania, and I live in Pennsylvania, so it was very interesting to also get that kind of perspective. It's got a great atmosphere. I love the practical effects. I love the score. The score is very eerie, and that's a big thing for me. I think scores in horror films are so important, and it definitely does a great job of creating that atmosphere. I like the acting. I like the characters. I like how the characters we get to know through their interactions with each other, as well as how they handle the epidemic that's going on. It's a film that also has a gut punch of an ending that really hits home the commentary. There are a lot of times where I will talk to people that say, oh, horror films nowadays, why are they putting this message, like, blah, blah, blah. And I use Night of the Living Dead as an example, that horror is a genre that for over 50 years has been using that genre to have commentary. So it's nothing new. Get real. But yeah, I love Night of the Living Dead, and that's why it's my number 10. Next up, my number 9, we have The Wailing. So The Wailing is a film that I will say this. I find it to be genuinely scary. Like, if this is a film that someone was like, The Wailing, is it scary or not? I would just straight up say, I think it's scary. I genuinely do think that it is scary. I think that there's imagery in this film I will never forget. And that's just something that I have to live with for the rest of my life. But I also know this. It's not a film that's for everyone. It is very, very violent. It is a film that has, yes, an exorcism scene that lasts like 10 minutes. It is not for everyone. It really isn't. But if you are someone that can appreciate fantastic directing, because in my opinion, this is some of the best directing I've ever seen, I would highly recommend you check this out. It is a South Korean film that hits really, really hard. And it also hits all 3 check marks for me. It creates dread, it creates terror, it creates horror. It is a really, really, really good film, and I feel like not enough people talk about this film. Please, watch The Wailing, especially if you're a fan of horror. It is really, really, really great. And yeah, that's why it's my number 9. Next up, some of my close friends are probably going to shut off the video at this point, because for a lot of my friends, this next one I'm about to mention is their number 1, and I can respect that. But my number 8 is Hereditary. I love Hereditary. I saw Hereditary twice in theaters, and I've seen it multiple times on Blu-ray. It is a masterpiece. It is a fantastic film, and it is also great because even if for those people that are like, is it scary or is it not, and if it's not scary to them, it is still a film that works so well as a family drama. The way it is able to create tension through this family dynamic and the things that happen to this family is palpable. It has such a great atmosphere. It has such a great score. Camera work is off the charts. I absolutely love what they do with the shadows. And I think that the world building, what they show versus what they don't show, is also something that really, really is impactful. I love Hereditary. I think it is a modern day masterpiece, not only just of horror, but of filmmaking in general. Watch Hereditary. It is a great, great film. And yeah, that's why it's my number 8. Next up, my number 7, we have the film that really, really got me into the genre. And my number 7, we have Psycho. So Psycho, I do own on Blu-ray. I own the Steelbook. I haven't got rid of it because I think the Steelbook looks great, but I also own it on 4K as a part of the Operation Shock collection. Psycho, I think, is great. It really, really changed the genre of horror, and it really also did a great job of having it where there are some filmmakers that now will have it where there's a certain event that happens at the end of the first act that really surprises and takes viewers off guard, and I think that Psycho is one of the first films to do that. There was a lot of firsts for this film, such as flushing a toilet. I know, I'm not going to get into the Hays Code, but yeah, there's a lot of things that prior to Psycho, this film, like other films, didn't really have. So the fact that this film broke ground with certain categories was something that really was impactful. And this film is also what kind of slowly dissipated the Hays Code, because people saw how well this film did, how much of an impact it had on terms of culture. And the film is great. I love the black and white cinematography. I love the acting. I think that the ending is one thing that I'm not the biggest fan of. Like the last shot I like, but prior to the last shot, there's a whole monologue of exposition. And I think that I understand that they had that because for the time period, people didn't really understand that mindset, or that, again, trying to be vague here, but that in particular with what happened. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but I understand for the time period, but now watching it as a viewer, that monologue of exposition sticks out like a sore thumb, and it just is not necessary. But besides that, I think that Psycho is a great, great film. Please watch Psycho if you can. It is a film that changed the genre, and it just, to this day, is a film I love, and I can rewatch many, many times. It holds the test of time, and it's one of my favorite films of all time. But yeah, that's my number 7. Next up, we have another film that takes place in Pennsylvania, and it also happens to be a Criterion film. My number 6 is Eraserhead. So Eraserhead is the ultimate Father's Day film. I would highly recommend you do what I did and watch this on Father's Day. It is a film that, and I've said this to my wife, is that whenever it is that we have a kid or kids, I will probably watch Eraserhead in preparation, because this is a film that I think does such a great job of really getting in the mindset of someone that wants to have a kid, but at the same time is so scared of the concept of having it. Like, hey, this is someone that I'm responsible for now. This is someone that I need to take care of. And I think the film does such a great job with that. And apparently David Lynch was using this film almost as a coping mechanism for being a father. So I think that that also is something that makes him all the more impactful. There's a lot of great body horror in this film. There's a lot of great art house horror in this film. It is a film that I think is very well crafted. The black and white cinematography is amazing. And similar to Night of the Living Dead, which also is a film that is a horror film that takes place in PA, I think it gets better and better with each viewing. The first time I saw it, I liked it, but I didn't love it. But it's a film that each time I watch it, I gain more and more insight for it. And now it's one of my favorite films of all time. It is a great, great film. One of my favorite Lynch films as well. And yeah, that's why it's my number 6. All right, guys. So now we're in the nitty gritty, the top 5. So my number 5, we have The Exorcist, theatrical cut. The Exorcist is a film that I saw at the beginning of 2015. And when I saw it, I watched it, truthfully, I'm going to go on the record and say I watched it online. And the only available version online was the director's cut, which in my mind, I was like, okay, if it's the director's cut, it means it's probably better than the theatrical cut anyways. So I watched it, and I thought it was solid, but I'm not going to lie. At this point in time, I did kind of have the mindset of scary or not scary. That mindset that I criticized at the beginning of my video, yes, I kind of had that mindset early on in my endeavor into horror. So I was like, well, it really wasn't that horrifying, and I really didn't think it was that well paced. So I was like, whatever, solid. But then I just started thinking about the imagery. I couldn't get the imagery out of my head, and I decided to finally watch the theatrical cut. I think it was 2019. I watched the theatrical cut because I bought the Blu-ray, which actually is on here. Because the Blu-ray at my local record store, I saw that it had the theatrical and the director's cut, and I, at this point in time, started hearing that the theatrical cut is actually better, but I didn't really know why. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna buy this. So I bought it and I watched the theatrical cut, and holy cow, it was like watching a different film. I loved it so much better. The director's cut has it where it starts right off with the house. It has all these CGI images of, like, you know, the entity. It also has, of course, the spider walk scene. It just isn't as well paced, and it just adds a lot of things that I just think aren't that good. There's a whole monologue in terms of, like, why this girl? Why? And it's like, dude, what are you talking about? If we as viewers are watching the film, we know why. The whole point is that it's one of those things where it can be anyone. It can be anyone. That's the whole point. Visually, we can tell why. So that's what I'm saying. Do not watch the director's cut. It is not good. Watch the theatrical cut, because the theatrical cut is great. It is a great, great buildup of character development, which, by the way, the characters, and I love how we have multiple characters. We see their point of views, and then the slow build-up to the third act. I love the tension it creates. I love how this is a drama first, but then it also is horror. I love how it uses a lot of techniques that were just incredible. I think that it uses a dream sequence really well. I think it's got a great, great gut punch of an ending. It is a great film. The theatrical cut. Stay away from the director's cut. The director's cut is not good. It's not. That is the one that I saw and I was like, yeah, 3.5 out of 5. And it's like, no, The Exorcist is not a 3.5 out of 5 film. The director's cut is. This is a 5 out of 5. This is a film that I watched more and more, and it went from 4.5 to 4.75 to 5. This is a masterpiece. I love The Exorcist. I think it's great. Watch the theatrical cut.
Yeah, that's why it's my number 5.
Next up, my number 4. This is a film that really, really changed me, not only in terms of how I view horror, but also just me in general. My number 4 is The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I'm not going to lie, growing up, I had a really close friend who likes The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I, of course, at this point in my life, when we were younger, I was like, oh, it's just a slasher film. It's just about killing people, and that's it. Again, I was very ignorant. I admit that. My friends watching this at the time, I admit it. I was wrong. I was ignorant to the genre because watching The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I see why, especially originally, people were interested in the slasher genre. Because this is the film that it's not about cutting up people. It is about creating an atmosphere that makes it feel as though you are in Texas in the middle of August in 100-degree weather that is eliciting terror and fear in a way that makes it feel as though you are with these characters. The way the camera work, the cinematography creates all of this, you feel as though you're with these characters sweating. You feel as though you are trying to figure things out as they are. And I think for me, that is why it creates all 3 checkboxes. It created dread, it created terror, and it created horror. But it also isn't a dumb film. It is a film where these characters are doing things where it makes sense. I always, when I'm watching films with people, sometimes they're like, why would someone do that? It's like, well, first of all, why would they go into a house? Well, they're just thinking that they're getting gas. They don't realize that this is a cannibalistic family. Like, how many times are you going to go to someone's house and you're like, yeah, this is probably a cannibalistic family? Like, I get it. People want to be careful and everything, but it's Texas, for crying out loud. Like, it's like, oh, neighborly and everything. So it makes sense. To me, at least. Again, every viewer is going to be different, but it's like, it makes sense. And this film definitely created an entire subgenre. Or, obviously, it didn't create it, but it feels as though it created it because it is a great, great example of a film that makes it feel as though you're watching a home video of a bunch of cannibalistic people, whilst at the same time creating a journey for these 5 characters that stumble into them. It is terrifying. It is a masterpiece. I think it is a great, great film. Please watch it if you like if you like horror films. It has been remade to death, and no movie in this franchise has touched even close to this original. But I would highly, highly recommend The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974. It is a masterpiece, and yeah, that's why it's my number 4. Next up, my number 3, we have Rosemary's Baby. So Rosemary's Baby, I watched around the same time, ironically, as Eraserhead. And I think that it's ironic because Eraserhead is my go-to Father's Day film, whilst Rosemary's Baby is now my go-to Mother's Day film, if you will. But similarly to Eraserhead, but even more so, I didn't like Rosemary's Baby as much as I do now. Rosemary Baby is a film that's similar to like The Exorcist. I think I gave it like a 3.5 out of 5. I thought it was solid, but it just wasn't really scary to me, other than the dream sequence. But that dream sequence is something that I couldn't get out of my head. So I decided to buy it on Criterion in 2020. And I've seen it, I think, 3 times since. And every time I've watched it, it's gotten better and better. And I feel the tension. I feel the palpable nature that this world is created through. And I think these characters are great. I think that the ending is a gut punch. I love it, man. I really do. I think it's a great, great film that just gets better with each viewing. And actually, I forgot to mention, when I saw this in 2015 and 2020, I did watch it once in between in 2017 in preparation for the movie Mother, because I heard that Mother was similar to Rosemary's Baby, so I was like, all right, I'll rewatch it. And I liked it more than I did in 2015, but it still wasn't like a great, great film the way I look at it as now. It wasn't until 2020 that it fully hit like that. But yeah, this is a great film. It is scary, for me at least, in terms of like creating dread, terror, and horror, because watching this film, it takes place all during the day. But there's these events that are in the background, and it's like, you put 2 and 2 together, and you know what's going on, sometimes before the characters do, and it just creates an unsettling feeling, because then you're like, okay, when are these characters going to figure it out? And it creates almost like a ticking time bomb. Great, great film. I love it. This is a film that, if we didn't get Rosemary's Baby, we wouldn't have gotten Hereditary, and that's a fact. I love Rosemary's Baby, and yeah, that's why it's my number 3. Next up, my number two. This was the film that when I saw it, I'm just going to go on the record and say it. This is, I think, the first film that I saw where there was actually nudity. What a way to be introduced to nudity in films, guys. My number two is The Shining. Yeah, The Shining is a great film. It really is. It's a masterpiece. I love it. I think that it's a film that I've seen at least a dozen times. I first watched it in like 2014 and I loved it. And then I think it was early 2015 I watched it in my one filmmaking class. And just really analyzing the cinematography was something that I loved doing because it was just great seeing all the tracking shots, the attention to detail in terms of the lighting, the color. And also, this is one of the few films I can say that I've owned it on DVD, Blu-ray, and now, of course, 4K. 4K is definitely the way to go, though. It looks immaculate. Please watch The Shining, especially before Dr. Sleep, because I know that Dr. Sleep, I know, is a more modern film, so people are going to watch that probably first before The Shining. But Dr. Sleep, it's solid. I do own it, but it doesn't hold a candle to The Shining. The Shining is a masterpiece. It is one of Stanley Kubrick's best films, and also one of my favorite films of all time. Watch The Shining, and yeah, that's why it's my number two.
And next up,
My number one. This is the first, and I think still the only Academy Award Best Picture winner to be a horror film. My number one is The Silence of the Lambs. What a fantastic film. This is a great, in my opinion, introduction to the horror genre because it's not just a horror film. It is also a thriller, it's a police procedural film, and it is a drama. Jonathan Demme's directing is incredible. He is able to balance all these different genres seamlessly. So sometimes he's holding back the horror a bit or having it where it's more psychological than visual. But he does have it where there are times where you do see the visuals, but a lot of times it's through the aftermath or the implications. And I think that's why this film was so successful when it came out, because it was able to reach such a broad audience. It is able to have such interesting commentary about gender. I think that is something that was really, really well done about this film. And also, it is one of the best examples of having a strong female protagonist with Clarice Starling. One of my favorite characters in general. And also, of course, Hannibal Lecter is one of my favorite characters of all time. Now, I did watch this in, I want to say May of 2013. So I know, it was before, it was before 2014 when I mentioned earlier in the video of like my renaissance of like watching original classics. And also, I know I mentioned The Shining, how it was my introduction to nudity on films. But I'm not going to lie, when I watched this in May of 2013, I did skip through some of the things. I did skip through some of the nudity that was in this film. And I'm saying this on the record because I think that watching it that first time, I liked it. Like, I think I gave it a 4.25. But I really didn't get the full experience because I was a novice to film at this time. I admit that. I admit that on the record, that watching this, I don't think I was mature enough to fully understand and fully respect it. It wasn't until like a year later that I actually watched the full thing and didn't actually skip things. And when I did, I loved it even more. Like, again, this is a film that got better and better with each viewing. But I think it's a great film. I think it's a great introduction to horror. And it is a film that this will be the third year. The last 3 years I've rewatched, I should say, the TV show Hannibal, which aired from 2013 to 2015. And then my goal is I always try to finish it before Halloween, and then I watch Silence of the Lambs on Halloween. So, again, this is my go-to. When I think of Halloween, the holiday, this is the film that I first think about. I know some people might just think of it as a thriller, but I think there is imagery in this film that I will never forget about. I still, to this day, will never forget about the famous ambulance sequence or the editing that gets to that sequence. I'll never forget, again, not going to spoil anything, but a certain individual escaping and how he does it. The aftermath. It's just certain imagery in this film I will never forget. It is seared into my memory, and I think it's a great film. Holy cow. Incredible film. Amazing characters. As I mentioned, Clarice Starling, Hannibal Lecter, incredible. I love Silence of the Lambs, and I'm so glad this film exists, because if I hadn't watched Silence of the Lambs, I don't know if I would have seen the TV show Hannibal. I don't. So huge shout out to Silence of the Lambs. It is a great film. And one of my favorite films of all time. But you guys, that is my top 10 horror films of all time, with many honorable mentions. Truthfully, probably an indulgent of honorable mentions. But either way, I'm very curious to see your guys' top 10 horror films of all time. Let me know in the comment section down below. And also, do keep in mind that I'm filming this video in October 2023. So who knows? My list that I gave you guys, it might change. Actually, no, it might not. I'm not going to say it might not. It will. It will. Let's be honest. If you're if you are a film buff, your list will change over the course of time, and that is a-okay. People change sometimes they don't, but I like to think of myself as someone that is gradually changing over the course of time. The more films I watch, the more knowledge I gain, and of course, my list does change. So keep that in mind when you guys are watching this video. But either way, guys, thank you very much for watching my video. I really do appreciate your guys' support. And as always, I'm very curious to see your guys' opinions and thoughts on your ranking down below. And as always, don't forget the subscription, notification bell, follow me down on Letterboxd, and I will catch you guys later.